What's up, Wizards? It's Dev and Julie. She's here. From Mtg, we like that magic stuff. And today, got some hot Zendikar Rising spoilers for you. The first day of spoilers, too. But it's just generally hot in here. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm already kind of sweaty. I was going to be sweaty anyway because some of these cards are ridiculous. But I'm sweating because my AC is broken. Turns out I have to get a whole new air conditioning unit. And that costs money. It costs so much money. But to take my mind off of that, we got some spoilers today, which is... that's a thing to get excited about, at least. And some of these are definitely things to get excited about. But as usual, Wizards showed off like some just draft stuff, right? And they showed off all the new mechanics for the set, and some of those cards aren't the best cards. But we have to talk about them anyway. I know you want to see every single card that got spoiled from today, and that is exactly what we're going to do, son. So sit down, get something to drink. I got some water. I never drink water, but since I'm super hot and I'm sweating everywhere, I have to replace the water in my body. At least that's how my logic works. But anyway, cards. We're going to talk about cards. That's why you came. Let's do it. Now, the first grouping of cards that I want to look at today does represent a new theme that's present in Zendikar Rising that we've never seen before, but I do think most of the cards with this theme are going to be relegated to the limited environment by and large. There are some things that might pop their head into standard from time to time, but all in all, I don't think the party mechanic looks too powerful to me. The first thing we saw with this theme was Shepherd of Heroes. This is 4 and a white for a 3/4 Angel Cleric with flying, and when it ETBs, you gain 2 life for each creature in your party. This has reminder text. Your party consists of up to 1 of each of Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard. You see what they did there? This is a very cute theme, but in terms of competitive play, it's probably going to be relatively difficult most of the time to have 1 of each party member creature type out at any given time. You know, sometimes it's hard enough to have 4 of the same creature type out at any given time. Imagine having to have 4 of different creature types at the same time and how that's going to affect your deck building and in what numbers you're going to play each creature type. And even then you have to have multiples of these creature types out to really reap the benefit of these cards. And even then a lot of these cards tend to be overcosted like this one. So I'm not too sure that the party mechanic is going to see much play outside of Limited, but it seems like a really cool mechanic in Limited. That said, there are some cool looking cards with this mechanic, like Acquisitions Expert. I like this a lot. This is 1 and a black for a 1/2 human rogue. And when it ETBs, target opponent reveals a number of cards from their hand equal to the number of creatures in your party. You choose one of those cards, that player discards that card. So this is kind of interesting. On its own, it's a burglar rat with better stats and a better creature type. But really, 2 better creature types, because human is relatively, decent too. We've got General Kudro in this format that works off of humans and makes, an anthem effect for them, basically. But this also goes in the Rogues deck along Thieves Guild Enforcer. So Rogues actually got a pretty good little bump, but so did humans because of cards like this. This, honestly, just by itself doesn't look like the worst card in the world, because again, you're getting better stats than Burglar Rat. But if you have just 1 other member in your party, then it starts to look pretty dangerous. If you can play like a Rogue on turn 1 into Expert on turn 2, you get to look at 2 cards when it ETBs, and that's actually not so bad. You don't get all the information in the world, but at least it's not your opponent gets to discard whatever they want to at that point. And it's pretty easy to make this work on curve, so I could actually see a card like Expert working in a deck, especially alongside turn 1 Enforcer. But of course, not everything we saw with the party theme seems great. Like Spoils of Adventure, this is 4 a white and a blue for an instant that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. You gain 3 life, you draw 3 cards. Now, there's a lot of cards, and if you ever can cast this for 2 mana, that's actually really, really good. Like if you've got all 4 creature types and only costs 2 mana at instant speed to draw 3, I think you're doing great, but I think that the amount of setup this requires probably keeps it from seeing too much competitive play, all things considered. Then there's really limited looking stuff like Kibira Outrider. Whatever he's riding looks incredible. I guess it's called a Kibira. And then the Grotag Bug Catcher, which is very almost disturbing art to me for some reason. But both of these look very limited playable to me. Although I guess Bug Catcher you might be able to make a case for constructed. But Outrider is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/3 human warrior. And when it ETBs, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature in your party. So if you can make this like a +2/+2 boost, that's not terrible. And it's always going to be a +1/+1 boost on its own because it's got the warrior creature type. So if you can give a creature like +2/+2 and get a hill giant, 4 mana, 3/3, actually doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world in Limited. So as far as like bread and butter commons, this is probably one of the good ones you're going to be looking out for if you want to build the Final Fantasy deck, the Dungeons and Dragons deck. Interesting, by the way, they've got a tie-in product coming out later on in 2021 that's going to replace the core set for the year. That's going to be Dungeons and Dragons themed. It's going to be like a crossover between the two. So this party theme, this party mechanic will fit very well into the Dungeons and Dragons set, I'm very sure. By the way, if that's the first time you're hearing that, I'm very excited about it. But it could be dumb, it could be poorly executed, but we'll have to wait and see. But Bugcatcher onto this card is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/2 Goblin Warrior with Trample. And when it attacks, it gets +1/+0 till end of turn for each creature in your party. Again, it's basically a 2 mana 2/2 Trample as long as it's on attacks, because it's always going to give itself at least +1/+0. But at the point where you play a turn 1... I don't know. I guess we won't have like 10th Street Dodger anymore. But if you just play like a turn 1 Rogue or a turn 1 Warrior and then play this on turn 2, it's actually not the worst 2-drop in a mono red deck, so long as all of your creatures have this creature type. It's really not too bad at all. I wish that it got like +1/+1 counters or something whenever you played a creature with one of these creature types, but it might be a bit too good for 2 mana. All things considered, though, I think if you have this and 2 other things in your party, that's pretty good. You know, this thing's going to swing for like a fair amount of damage. Really 4 damage for your 2 mana investment with Trample. So I could see in exactly the right mono red build, this actually goes in. I mean, there's already going to be like Robber the Rich, which is a rogue. I mean, there's a couple of things that already fit the proper creature types for this. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this show up if the proper mono red deck exists to put it in, because it's actually not the worst 2-drop on rate. But we also got to see a couple of new legendaries that work off of the party mechanic, and both of these look pretty sweet to me. We got Azri, Beacon of Unity, as well as Linvala, Shield of Seagate. What's up, Linvala? Good to see you again. But Azri, 5 mana, but not really. It's 4 and a white for a 4/6 legendary human warrior that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. So that casting cost is nowhere near as steep as it looks when you first look at the card. But it's also got hybrid costs. You can pay 2 aura blue, 2 aura black, 2 aura red, and 2 aura green to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, Wizard, and or Ally cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, this is a relatively steep cost, and it's going to require that you build basically a 5-color deck if you want to actually activate this thing. But you can probably get it down for like 3 mana some of the time, and that's going to be really sweet. Again, I'm a little bit wary about the party mechanic, mostly because I hate sweepers, and sweepers are cards that people play, so you can just never be sure that you're even going to have one creature on the table, much less a whole gang of dudes with different creature types that you've set up in exactly the right way. Even if your opponent has like one spot removal spell, they can completely screw up what you're trying to do. But this at least helps you find other creatures of those types once you do get it down. So I kind of like that. I don't know, like just on stats alone, if you get this for 2 or 3 mana, you're doing really well, but that requires a lot of setup and a lot of deck building concessions that I'm just not sure are worth it in the standard environment. But this might be really sweet in Commander, especially since it also gives the nods to allies. I'm not sure we're actually going to see allies in this set. I'm not 100% on that yet. Maybe there are some allies as we move forward here, but I think they're going to stick with the party theme for the most part, which means we're going to see a lot of Clerics, Wizards, Warriors, Rogues. So I'm not really sure we're going to see too many allies, which means that the word ally on this card would be specifically a nod to Commander players, and it does look pretty sweet in that format. But Linvala, I think, might actually have even more potential, perhaps. Linvala is just 3 mana, a white, a blue, and a colorless. Damn it. Go. Linvala is just 3 mana, a white, a blue, and a colorless for a 3/3 legendary angel wizard. Sweet creature types. She has flying, of course. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So you kind of detain it. If you remember that ability. Sacrifice Linvala to choose Hexproof or Indestructible. Creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. So this is sweet for a few reasons. I was just saying that I hate sweepers. This protects your creatures from sweepers. Even if you're not trying to get a full party. If you do have a full party, it's actually super dope. This icing ability actually seems like it'd be great when it does pop off, but it seems like it would also be a little bit difficult to get it to pop off. But even if you don't have a full party, you just have Linvala and like one other creature, you can basically use this as like a selfless savior. Just sack Linvala to save your other creature from a sweeper, and that can probably win you the game on occasion. But obviously this is to make sure that once you've got your party in place, they can actually stay in place if your opponent does have, Shatter the Sky or Storm's Wrath or whatever. And I can see the party deck really needing a card like this, but just on stats alone, it's a 3-mana 3/3 flyer that protects the rest of your team from sweepers. That's actually kind of very good just on rate alone, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this show up. Now, there was some other stuff that was strictly for limited play today, but not too much, Tejuru Blightblade, it's just a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch, but it's got cool creature types. It's an elf rogue, so it's not just like a random scorpion or something like that. This one actually has real creature types, and that could be important when trying to assemble a party in limited. Same thing with Wind Rider Wizard. That's so hard to say. It's like that bit in the Last Unicorn. You've roused a wizard's wrath. You've roused a wizard's Wath. But anyway, that bit aside, Wind Rider Wizard, I nailed it. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard with flying. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery or a wizard spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So this is interesting because when you're building for a party, you're going to have multiple wizards in your deck, very likely. So that actually seems really, really sweet, because if you play extra wizards that you don't necessarily need because you've already got this wizard out, then it at least gives you a benefit for doing so. Plus, you can actually just make a wizard deck, right? You just make a wizard deck, and this would be a pretty sweet 3-drop in, say, Commander, but I doubt that it would make like a standard wizards deck on these stats. That said, on these stats, really good and limited. A 3-mana 2/2 flyer is effectively a Windrake, and we play those regardless, but one that allows you to play either the party deck or a wizard deck, or more importantly, a spells deck, a sort of spell slinging kind of deck. And work out in literally all of those lists. Seems like a bread and butter uncommon for limited to me, so I'd really be looking out for this one. I think it could definitely build a lot of bridges when creating your decks in limited. But speaking of controlling wizards, there's a light wizard sub-theme within the party theme so far, and I'm sure this will be true of most of the other creature types within the party sub-theme. Expedition Diver is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/2 merfolk wizard with flying. As long as you control another wizard, Diviner has, whenever this creature dies, draw a card. So not too bad. Again, on stats, it's a Snapping Drake, a 4 mana 3/2 flyer, and those again are decent in the limited environment, though not quite as good as Windrakes because they die to Windrakes. So it's not as good, but still like historically a decent creature to play in limited on stats. If you happen to have another creature, another wizard, then being able to draw a card is a very sweet upside, because it's almost certainly going to die in combat if your opponent has a flyer out. So I like that a good bit, but what I'm thinking they're doing here is that each of these creature types, and this is speculation, but I'm thinking each of these creature types is likely going to have a common and an uncommon in its given color, right? So that's likely what both Diviner and Wind Rider Wizard are. But moving on, there are a couple of more cards that work off the party sub-theme. I think they just spoiled all of them today. One of them is better than the other, so I'll start with the one that I don't think is as good first, and that's Coveted Prize. This is 5 mana, 4 and a black for a sorcery that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. If you have a full party, you may cast a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana costs. So if you do have a full party, this costs 1 mana to cast and effectively puts the thing that you tutored for into play for free, basically, or whatever you tutored for, you just cast it for free, again, given that it's under 4 mana or under, which is actually very sweet. But I imagine that if you do cast this, you almost never will have a full party. And on the occasions where you do have a full party, you're kind of restricted to going and getting another creature for your party, right? Like most of the really good, desirable things to go get with this will probably just be other creatures that are in your party deck, because you can't play too many things that aren't creatures in your deck that's trying to create a full party. I see some interesting, frustrating deck building concession one has to make to put this deck together. And even if you do, I'm not absolutely sure it plays this card, but just on power level alone, this has the potential to be the most powerful card in this entire party suite, right? 1 mana to go tutor up a card and just cast it for free is absolutely bonkers, but there's so much setup one has to actually do to pull this off that I'm not actually sure at the end of the day it's going to be consistent enough to make it work. But one card that I really like is Tejuru Paragon. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 3/2 elf, and it is also a cleric, a rogue, a warrior, and a wizard, and it has kicker 3. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, again, on stats, this is pretty decent. A 2 mana 3/2 with an okay creature type. creature types, it's got like 5 of them, is actually not bad. Again, just on stats, it replaces Crawl Harpooner, it replaces Barkeye Troll and Stompy, right? We just needed a 2-mana, 3-power thing that can attack somewhat profitably. I don't like the 2 toughness on this, and I think it's going to hinder the card's playability quite a bit, but at the same time, there's so many cool things that can be done with this. If you do cast it with the kicker, you get card advantage off of it. So for 5 mana, I think that's probably going to be worth it a lot of the time. I just like a lot about this card. I like it when you cast it for 2. I like it when you cast it for 5. And I don't think that it actually taxes the deck building restrictions or the deck building concessions too much of the party deck. As a matter of fact, I think this is one of those cards that most helps the party deck come together because it's literally everything in one card. So I like this card a lot. And it might make the party deck a little bit more playable, but even outside of the party deck, I think that in your mono green Stompy deck, if you throw this down on turn 2, you have a 3-power attacker, that's not bad, but if you get it, if you top deck it late in the game, being able to draw a warrior off of it or something is actually pretty decent too, so I like the card for a few reasons and a few decks. But keeping on with the limited theme, I promise we're almost done with that. Here's Zulaport Duelist. This is just 1 blue mana for a 1/1 human rogue with flash. And when it ETBs, up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn, and its controller mills 2 cards. Now I say keeping with the limited theme, but this will see some standard play in budget decks at the very least. This is an unbelievable rogue for the blue-black rogues deck. This, along with Thieves Guild Enforcer, will occasionally mill your opponent 4 cards by itself. Plus it has flash, and that's really, really dope. This might replace Spectral Sailor in some way, shape, or form in the flash decks. It's just the 1 mana. It doesn't have any sort of evasion, but being able to kneecap a creature when it ETBs is probably going to be pretty good in the aggro matchups, right? We have a couple of creatures like this already. I think it's Trinity Stinger and like Fairy Duelist that are similar to this in that they cut a creature's power when they ETB and they have flash, but those are both 2 mana, and I think the difference between 1 and 2 mana in a flash deck is going to be enormous a lot of the time, because flash basically plays like a tempo deck. So again, the difference between 1 and 2 mana is just it's this giant chasm that I think they might play this. And at the absolute very least, budget rogues, here we go. Let's do it, boys. It's on. Actually, if you want to play Mill, we'll get to a card a little bit later that makes me think Mill is actually for real on. It's no longer like a red herring. It's no longer like a fake. It's no longer just like a trap. I think Mill might actually be on, you guys, but it's not because of this card. We'll get to it a little bit later. But first, let's look at Might of Murasa, Gnarled Colony, and Spitfire Lagak, which is probably the best of these 3 cards easily. But again, this looks like more of a budget playable card than anything to me. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 3/4 lizard is the Lagak, and it has a landfall. That's right, landfall's back. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, Lagak deals 1 damage to each opponent, which is super awesome. Now, 4 mana is much. 4 mana is much mana. But it seems like after, this is the 3rd time they've done landfall, I think. Maybe it's even the 4th. No, I think it's the 3rd time they've done landfall. And they finally figured out how to price this ability right here. This landfall ability apparently costs 4 mana, and it has 4 toughness. I like it. I like it a lot. And again, this is probably going to be a budget-only card because the price is a little bit steep, to be honest. But at the same time, I have always wanted exactly this text on a landfall card, so we're going to try to make it work, and I'm excited about it. As far as the other 2 things on the page here, Gnarled Colony is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 beast with kicker 2 and a green. And if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So you get a 5 mana 4/4 in that situation. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter has trample. So a 5 mana 4/4 trample is what you get in your limited deck. Now in your standard deck, you would be getting a card that gives your Yorvos and, Stonecoil Serpent already has trample, but your Yorvos trample, and anything else that happens to get a +1/+1 counter, right? Wildwood Scourge is a good example because it's a huge creature that gets a lot of counters, but nonetheless does not have trample and requires it. So there's that, but honestly I don't think this card is destined to see any standard play whatsoever, but it does look really interesting in Limited where it has a few different options. Kicker is a wonderful ability in Limited. Kicker's a great ability in Standard, but Kicker is an especially good ability in Limited where it gives all your cards, this sort of modal aspect. And a card like this that can either help out your curve on turn 2, get in some damage, or trade with an opposing creature if you need to, set tempo. Or it can come down later on in the game and be huge and give, not only itself but one other creature trample. Like all of that, that spread, that variety of options is really attractive in a limited card. And not only that, but the card is common. So I think this is another one of those like really important green commons for limited, and keep that in mind. But Might of Murasa, 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant with kicker 2 and a green. And target creature gets +3/+3 unless the spell was kicked. And in that case, the creature gets +5/+5. So this is just, limited combat trick. That's what that card is. We also saw Blood Chief's Thirst and Shell Shield today. I think one of these is actually kind of standard playable. Shell Shield be that card. This is just 1 blue mana for an instant with kicker 1. Target creature you control gets +0/+3 till end of turn. If this spell was kicked, that creature also gains hexproof until end of turn. Now, does that sound just a little familiar? Yeah, it's Dive Down, but it costs an extra mana to get the hexproof half of it. Now, sometimes you didn't need the hexproof half of Dive Down. So I'm entirely happy with Lavos' Shell. Please tell me you played Chrono Trigger. This is Lavos' Shell. It's like exactly Lavos' Shell. But anyway, I could definitely see just paying the 1 mana for this and it working out some of the time, especially against like red removal spells, for instance. That seems like it'd be good. But if you do have to pay the 2 mana to give your creature hexproof to get rid of, to counter black spot removal or something, it's probably still worth it a great deal of the time. I'd look out for this card. I think it's probably standard playable in a tempo deck. Go. Now, Blood Chief's Thirst, I actually don't mean to discount this card because I think this card might be very good. Thirst is a black mana for a sorcery with kicker 2 and a black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. Interesting. How we're going to see some 2 mana planeswalkers in this set, dog? If this spell was kicked, instead destroy target creature or planeswalker. So if you pay 4 mana for this at sorcery speed, which I do think kind of hurts the card an awful lot, but if you pay 4 mana for this, it's unconditional removal. Now for 1 mana, you can get rid of something with converted mana cost 2 or less, and I think this is an amazing spell for that reason. I think this is probably a little bit better than Shell Shield. A little bit better, right? I actually think that in some ways this is the new Fatal Push. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Fatal Push, but at the same time, 1 mana to take out, anything from Scavenging Ooze to Robber of the Rich and in between is a very, very good deal. And there's going to be a ton of aggro decks in the upcoming format. And being able to kneecap them while also, basically double spelling. On turn 3, you can play a 2-drop plus this and kneecap something from aggro, get rid of their 1-drop or 2-drop. I think that's going to be a huge tempo swing that's going to determine some games. Just 1 mana for this card is absolutely just bonkers. And sometimes if you have to kick it to kill a beanstalk giant or some huge guy or whatever, you'll do that and you'll be happy that you had the option to do it. But even without the kicker, I think this card would be perfectly standard playable as is, because being able to blow up literally any 2-drop creature for 1 mana is a heck of a deal. This is a good Magic card. And see, now we're getting into the good stuff here. Here's Murasso Root Gazer, which is one of the first things I saw today. This is a green and a white for a 2/3 beast with vigilance. You can tap it to put a basic land from your hand onto the battlefield, and you can also tap it to return a basic land you control to its owner's hand. So this is tailor-made for getting you landfall triggers, which is really sweet. It's also an interesting ramp tool given that it's Selesnya. It also happens to go in the Vigilance deck. There is a Vigilance deck, in case you were wondering. It actually does exist. And this is a very good 2-drop for it, so keep that in mind. But for the most part, the most exciting ability on this card is tap to put a land into play. That's wonderful. And given that it has Vigilance, you can attack with it and also tap to put a land into play. And you don't even have to do it on your turn, You can, end of your opponent's turn, tap it to put a land into play, which is actually kind of unbelievable. And if you didn't draw a land for the turn, but you need to trigger landfall, you can always tap it to pick a land up and put that land back down, which is just crazy. I think this card has a lot of play on it that we don't quite see yet, but just a 2 mana, relatively overstated thing, 2/3 with a keyword ability for 2 mana. We really could do worse for that than that. So, a creature that's at least at a good rate that has tap to put a land out, yeah, that's probably more than standard playable if I had to guess. Now, earlier we talked about a 1-drop little rogue dude, but that's actually not the only 1-drop little rogue dude we saw today. Here's Merfolk Wind Robber. It's a blue mana for a 1/1 Merfolk rogue with flying. Merfolk can fly, apparently. Whenever Merfolk Wind Robber deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card. Sacrifice Wind Robber, draw a card. Activate this ability only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their yard. So this works with Thieves Guild Enforcer. Again, that card wants you to have 8 cards in your yard, or their yard. And it's a rogue. This is also yet another one-drop rogue. And honestly, that deck really needed one-drop rogues. It needed to be able to play, 3 rogues on turn 3, 2 rogues on turn 2 after a turn 1 enforcer. And that is 100% what we've gotten. So really, you'll love to see it. The rogues deck is actually coming together. And this actually looks pretty sweet. It is not hard to get 8 cards into your opponent's graveyard. And this doesn't have to go in rogues. You can go in some sort of mill deck alongside Vantress Gargoyle, and it performs the same function there. Being able to sack it, because you're not really trying to deal combat damage to your opponent in either one of these decks. The rogues deck can kill you through combat damage, but often it's trying to mill you. Now, this can block something, sacrifice it when you block it, to draw a card. And that seems really fantastic to me, especially for a 1-mana investment. You get a body that can draw a card and has relevant creature types. Like, yeah, sign me up for literally all of this. Let's get back to some good stuff, like Aura, Skyclave, Hierophant. This is interesting. 2, a white and a black for a legendary core cleric. It's a 3/3 lifelink. When Hierophant or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric card with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. That is dope. Another, it's a cleric commander, and the more of these, the absolute better. I've always really liked cleric as a creature type and thought that it was woefully underrepresented. So please bring on more of these cards. I don't care if they're really only playable in commander. I want them. But is this only playable in commander? We'll have to see what other clerics we get, because this might have some kind of loop you can pull off in standard. That would be dope. So I don't want to judge it on the text box yet, but I will say a 4-mana 3/3 lifelink is not the absolute worst rate in the entire world, especially if you're up against an aggro deck or something. This can brick wall them, gain you life on blocks and stuff. It's not the worst rate in the world, but I am more interested in knowing whether or not that text box is going to actually do anything in standard, but we probably won't know until we see all of the clerics. But speaking of dope commanders, here's Zerth Sand the Trickster. This is 5 mana, 3, a black and a blue for a 4/4 legendary merfolk rogue with flash. You can pay 2, a blue and a black, and return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. To put Zerth Sand the Trickster from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. In case you don't know what this is a reference to, this is the ninjutsu ability. It is literally just the ninjutsu ability, but with rogues instead of ninjas. Whenever Zerth Sands deals combat damage to a player, I'm just going to call him Sands, like from Undertale. Whenever Sands deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So, if this does combat damage, if you ninjutsu it in to deal combat damage, then suddenly you just get to reanimate one of their creatures, which is good. It seems quite good to me. Now, of course, they have to be playing creatures in the first place. They have to be playing desirable creatures for you to reanimate, and you have to put a desirable creature to reanimate in their yard in the first place. But there are ways to do that without having to remove it. Remember, rogues can mill your opponent. So this would be actually a really sweet 5-drop for that deck, where you've already milled half of their deck. But if you get in with a flying rogue, or just the one rogue that gets in for combat damage unblocked, ninjutsu this in, and suddenly you get the biggest creature you've milled. That seems really, really cool to me. And I like the card an awful lot. Of course, even if you've just, killed a creature with a Heartless Act, killed their Elder Gargaroth with a Heartless Act, next turn get in with one guy, and suddenly you can get their Gargaroth out of their yard. All of this seems actually really sweet to me. I love that this dude has flash too, and that he has an ninjutsu cost rather than just flashing in for his mana cost. He actually cost only 4 to ninjutsu in, which is really, really sweet. And he's got dope stats too. I mean, for 4 mana, it could have been 5, but for 4 mana, you're getting a 4/4 plus whatever creature you get out of your opponent's yard, all at instant speed. So, but that's, of course, only during your combat step that you can do that. But sometimes you'll just flash this in to, block something on your opponent's combat step, and that'll be a perfectly fine use for the card, too. Again, I like cards that have a lot of variable uses, and this is definitely one of them. Because you can just play it as removal some of the time if you just need a flash blocker that sticks around after it blocks. Pretty sweet in that role too, but if it actually ever does nab something out of the opponent's yard, it is just an unbelievable amount of card advantage and a whole lot of stats all at one time. But more legends here, everybody. Here's Drano, the Last Blood Chief. 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for a 4/4 legendary vampire cleric with flying. Do you like the cleric creature type? Whenever the Last Blood Chief attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. You return that card to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. The creature is a vampire in addition to its other types. So it's kind of the opposite in some ways of the other card. It's a 5 mana 4/4, but instead of flash, it has flying. It's almost a mirror, Rather than getting creatures out of your opponent's yard, this one gets creatures out of your yard, which I think is infinitely better, which I think is infinitely better because you have more control over that situation. You have more control over what creatures go into your graveyard, whether you mill them or whatever. You sacrifice them, it doesn't matter. But your opponent might not even be playing juicy creatures or creatures at all, depending on, they're playing control or something. So you really have no control over that card, or not as much as you'd like. But this one is far easy. It has a greater ease of use on the user end. So I like this one in a lot of ways, but I think the other card is better, honestly, the Rogue that flashes in. I'd rather have that because this one has no real immediate impact on the table. You have to wait until the next turn. You don't have to deal combat damage, but you do have to get to your attack step where you can swing with this. And that's easier said than done, especially with a 5-mana card in Standard. And you play your Drano, it just gets Heartless acted or something. So I actually don't think this looks extremely powerful, to be honest, but I do think it's cool, and those are two different things. Here's another card that I think is really cool, but I'm not sure that it's powerful, and that's Cleric of Life's Bond. This is 2 mana, a black and a white for a 2/2 Vampire Cleric. Whenever another Cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Cleric of Life's Bond. So it's kind of a Daxos or an Impassioned Orator if you want to look at it as a replacement for that card. But it only counts when you play Clerics, which is lame compared to cards like, Impassioned Orator and Soul Sisters and whatnot. But it's also kind of a Johnny's Pride mate, but only then sort of like they just powered down both versions of a card and stapled the abilities onto this guy. So you sort of get Soul Sisters and a Johnny's Pride mate on one card, but both versions, both abilities are powered down, and it's a little bit lame, honestly. Like, one of the most powerful things about a Johnny's Pride mate was being able to make it into like a 7/7 all in one turn. And you can't really do that the way this is worded, so I don't know how much I love it, but it definitely goes in the Cleric deck, which we will be making. We absolutely will, because I've always really liked Cleric as a creature type, and this is pretty much an obvious 4-of for that deck. But we also saw Legion Angel today. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a 4/3 Angel Warrior with flying. When Legion Angel enters the battlefield, you may reveal a card you own named Legion Angel from outside the game and put it into your hand. So is it worth a sideboard slot to play this card? I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm not really sure who this is for, because in Draft, in Limited, you're like never going to get 2 of these. Maybe you can in Draft. It's possible you pick 2 of these up in Draft, and then you just win. But you're probably almost never going to see 2 of these in Draft. It's just not. It doesn't seem like it'd be for Limited because it's rare. So you can't count on getting 1, much less 2. But it seems a little powered down for Standard, too. I mean, a 4-power flyer for 4 hasn't been the best stats in a long time, but at least it's something. I mean, it's pretty good stats, I guess. And the ability to just go grab another one does seem pretty sexy, but all things considered, I would imagine there's probably better stuff you can be doing than this. But I might eat those words. I very well might. One thing that's cute about it is that we always talk about cards replacing themselves. Cards that draw a card, like Euro. It comes into play, it replaces itself. This literally replaces itself. Like the most literal interpretation of that term. So I think that's very cute. And might very well make this worth playing. We played Crackling Drake, which is often a 4-power or more flyer that draws a card when it comes into play. And we say that card replaces itself. Well, this is a 4-power flyer for 4 mana that replaces itself. And that's good. That does actually seem pretty decent to me, but we'll see. I mean, I guess it's a form of card advantage in white. You could argue this is card advantage in white, and that is very good. So I like it. I do like it, but I'm interested to see whether or not this really sees play. I think it could, but I'm not sold on it. And what's the split? Do you play 3 and 1, or do you play 2 and 2? What do you do? But anyway, on to it is a confounding conundrum. This is the next card. That's a good segue, Dev. Anyway, 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an enchantment that's got a lot of people talking. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. So that's a lot of words. Basically, if someone plays more than 1 land in a turn, they have to start bouncing lands back to their hand. So this sort of, kind of, cuts down the power level of Euro. And cards like it, Azusa Lost But Seeing, and Dryad of Elysian Grove, and just literally anything that lets you play extra lands in a turn. This will cut down the power level up, which is good. It's needed. That's absolutely needed. Cards like Cultivate, for instance. Any deck trying to ramp into Euro, or Yugen, for that matter. We definitely need something to combat those decks. And I think this is a good tool. I hate that it's blue. I wish that a color other than blue or green had access to good answers like this. But at least it's main deckable. It draws you the card when it enters the battlefield, and I think that's actually really sweet. because that makes it a lot more main deckable. It's card filtering at that point. You don't feel like you lost a card in your hand or had to play a card in your deck that's bad. And I really like that about it. So just a 2-mana enchantment that draws a card is good. It also triggers Constellation on stuff like Archon of Sun's Grace, for instance. That might be really important. You can blink it with Yorion. That might also be important if you want to draw extra cards, and it could be. So this could replace like Omen of the Sea, for instance, or just be extra Omen of the Sea. That also, you know, hobbles the ramp decks, and that's probably going to be a really important thing to do in the upcoming format. In the cards I want in Zendikar Rising video, I outlined a couple of cards that I wanted to address ramp specifically, so I'm glad they are doing that, and this looks like a pretty good piece to do so. But the hype train is like really pulling into the station because now we're getting to the best cards of the day, like no doubt, absolutely. And we'll start with some of the more exciting cards of the day and get into these land cycles here. Now, first I want to talk about the land cycle that is a spell on one half and a land on the other, starting with Polacca Predation and Polacca Caverns. Sounds like a basketball reference to me, the Malacca Lacca board. If anybody remembers basketball, it's a terrible movie, but it's fun. But anyway, Polacca Predation is a spell. It's a sorcery. To the best of my knowledge, these flip lands that are a spell on one side are a spell when they're in your hand for whatever reason, right? Like you can duress one of these out of your opponent's hand, for instance, because the duress doesn't see the card as a land; it sees it as a spell. So that'll come up every now and again. These are spells when they're in your hand, but you can play either half of them from your hand. If you just want a black source, then this can come down tapped and help your lands, basically. If you didn't draw enough lands in the opening game, then this is basically a spell that helps you hit your land drops. And I think that's actually really important. It addresses one of the issues that I have with Magic as a game, and a lot of people have with Magic, in terms of its resource management system. I really just kind of hate the way the whole land system is in some ways. And any spells that help you hit your land drops like this, I think it's a really creative and elegant solution to a problem inherent in one of Magic's, most important systems. So I really like cards like this that help you hit those drops, but they don't have to be land drops if you don't want them to be. Conversely, people are saying these actually bring your land count down, which they could if you wanted to look at it that way in an aggro deck. But I like the idea of playing a relatively normal land count, but also carrying these cards. So if you don't hit your land drops for whatever reason, boom, you have lands. But these also mitigate flood. If you draw them in the late game, they don't have to be lands. They can just be whatever spell you drew. So I really, really like this design choice. I think that just in terms of, again, overall design, these cards are going to be better than either half of the card because of how they, just help smooth out your curve and smooth out your gameplay experience. So neither side of the card has to be particularly good, and they're not, right? But together, they're much, much better. The same thing is true of the red one, which at the time is the only other one we've seen. Valakut Stoneforge and Valakut Awakening. Valakut Stoneforge, just a land, enters taps for red. Again, you'll hit your drops. That's what's important. Either that or, again, conversely, you could play fewer mountains in your mono red deck and play this card. Either way, I think, is an acceptable way to play these cards. But Valakut Awakening, 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. Draw that many cards +1. So you can just put 0 cards. You basically cycle this at the same rate as like a Triome. Pay 3 mana. Don't put any stuff from your hand back. You'll still draw a card. And it's instant speed, which is not actually terrible. That's really, I'm telling you, this ain't bad at all. And people have been saying, is the wheel effect worth it? Again, I don't think that the effect has to be very powerful in order to get you to really play this card, because again, the spread of playability on it is what's most important here. The way it smooths out the gameplay is what's most important. And again, I think it's worth the cost of playing 2 cards that aren't necessarily great to play cards that are more than the sum of their parts, and that's what this is. If you have to cycle it at the end of your opponent's turn, that's fine. If you have to discard like 4 cards and get a fresh new grip, that's fine too. That's going to be really good with stuff like Riel. It's going to be good if you just want to dump a bunch of cards into your graveyard for reanimation. There's a ton of reasons you might want to discard cards in this format right now. So just the wheel effects might be good enough on its own to just smash your opponent in the face with one creature or another. So I like a lot about Awakening. I think this is actually a very, very sweet card, and we'll almost certainly see play, even more so than the black, tapped land. What do we want to call these? Flip lands? We already have a cycle of those. But speaking of flip lands, the other cycle that we got is just dual lands. They're pretty much the one that everyone predicted. You can play either side of them. Here's a good example. Clearwater Pathway and Murkwater Pathway. You can play either side of it. So you can play the side that taps for black, or you can play the side that taps for blue. But they don't flip over. A lot of people were thinking that these would flip every time you tapped them. That was the speculation. But nope, you just choose a side and play that one, which I think is very good. It's not as good as a shock land. I want to get that right out of the way on Front Street while we're just getting into the sort of the main discourse about these lands so far that I've seen online today. They are not as good as Shocklands. I don't even think they're anywhere near as close to as good as Shocklands, but these are still very much playable dual lands that'll be really good for the 2-color aggro decks that still deserve to exist in the format. And it's going to give, 3-color control decks some really difficult decisions. So that's another layer in gameplay that makes it a little bit more difficult to play, 3 and 4-color decks, but I think they're still possible with these lands. And especially in 3 and 4-color decks where you play, 4 or 5 of these different lands, then you have to make tough decisions, but it might not be as tough as you think, given how many of these different lands you're playing. But it will suck. How many times have you used a dual land on the turn you cast it to tap for one color, and then the very next turn you used it to tap for a different color? It happens literally all the time. So I don't think these are anywhere near as good as Shocklands. But at the same time, I think that they are a worthy replacement that I will take and not be too upset about, and really appreciate, if nothing else, the design, because I think the design is very good. And we're back, and I told you I was going to be even sweatier by the end of this video, but we've got 4 more cards to cover here that I'm super excited about. So I want to show my face so you really get to see my reaction to some of these, because some of these are just obviously incredibly powerful, and then there's others that are personal favorites of mine. Like my actual for real favorite card from the day, no matter how powerful anything else is, Rune Crab, baby. It's just 1 mana for a 0/3 crab, got Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, they mill 3 cards, so it's kind of a Hedron crab. Almost exactly a Hedron crab. So now it's on. Now it's on. I told you earlier in the video that we were going to get to a card that makes mill real. This is the one, y'all. This is the one. I'm telling you, Teferi's Tutelage is already kind of sort of almost made mill a real deck. I know a lot of people don't feel that way, but there are so many games with Tutelage that feel very, very close against even the best decks in Standard. So a card like this, I think, will take the mill deck a very long way, even if you're not putting extra lands into play. You get this on turn 1, and you just play a land every turn in the game from then on out. Well, you just got 9, 12, 15 extra mills off of this, and if you get multiples in play, holy crap, you're milling a ton of cards. Hedron Crab has already proved that. If you get turn 1 crab, turn 2 crab, then from that point on, you're just destroying your opponent's library on every turn. And then when you do add cards like Euro or Azusa, right, then suddenly you're just taking apart your opponent's library in a matter of a couple of turns. Not to mention that you still play Teferi's Tutelage and all that, which also goes fairly well with Euro now that I think about it. So, I really think that the mill deck could seriously be real. It needed exactly this. A 1 mana piece that can't be shocked, can't be disfigured, dead-weighted, whatever, nothing like that. It has to be hit by a bolt type effect. Decent toughness, actually blocks kind of well in the early game so you don't just die against certain decks. This alongside Merfolk's Secret Keeper and Teferi's Tutelage will more than make up for losing Drowned Secrets, I think. I am just super jacked about this. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I love me some mill. I know some people hate it. It's my favorite thing ever. Almost. It's very close to my favorite thing ever. So seeing this card just made my day. I have no air conditioning. I am very hot and very fat and very sweaty. But this card made me happy. This made my day. But then something came along and made my day worse a little bit. Actually, I can't tell if I'm excited for the return of Lotus Cobra or not. I really don't. I'm really not sure. I'm kind of nervous about Lotus Cobra being able to exist in this format. Just a little. This is a very rampy card. In case you can't tell, it's rampy. In case you've never been introduced to the snake. This boy is rampy. Just 2 mana. It's 2 mana. It's 2 mana for a snake. And it's got Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you add a mana of any color to your pool. It's just still so insane. It's still just as insane as it was, 12 years ago when the card first came out. Card is bonkers. Although Lotus Cobra really didn't see all the play in the world back then. It was kind of a bust in terms of what we expected it to do and what it ultimately did. And hope maybe it'll be the same, but I just get really nervous. I get so nervous about Lotus Cobra being in any format. And this card has done work outside of the Standard environment since it left the Standard environment. It has become a popular card in other formats. So, yeah, I can definitely see it. Especially if we have cards that allow us to play extra lands in a turn. Stuff like this just gets a a bit out of control really fast. And even if you're not putting extra lands out, you're just making your land drop every turn. That's like having a mana dork in a way, because you just get an extra mana every turn of any color. It's very easy to kill this thing, right? It's very easily disruptible. So it does have an inherent, like, baked-in fairness, but at the same time, I get really worried about a deck that can, drop this on turn 2, turn 3, drop a land, get a mana, Euro, get a mana, right? It just, that seems... I am nervous. I'm nervous about the stake. Let me just say that. I'm kind of excited, but tentatively so. But there's a reason, too, that we needed Lotus Cobra to make whatever mana that we want to and fix our mana perfectly when we drop our lands and blah, blah. There's a reason. That's because we saw 4-color Omnath today. Omnath, I'm going to read them. I hope you don't mind. Omnath, Locus of Creation. This is all 5 colors minus black for a legendary elemental. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. This is 4 mana, 4/4. Draw a card when it ETBs. I'll take it. That's not bad, but you haven't heard the crazy part yet. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life if this is the first time this ability is resolved this turn. If it's the second time, you just add Omnath's casting cost to your pool. If it's the third time, whoops, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. Hey, come on, man. Like, let's say you have an Azusa out, you drop a Euro, whoops, you did it, right? Like, if you're able to play both lands off of Azusa and a land off of Euro, you just wrath the board, my dude. Actually, you didn't wrath the board. You wrathed one side of the board. That's so crazy. That's so crazy, man. Can you imagine if, like, Risen Reef was still going to be in the format? Yet another way to put more lands out. We've got tons of ways to put more lands out. Just cultivate. Migration Path gets you to this. Right? Like, if you just play a land for the turn and then Migration Path, boom, you've crushed the whole board. You've Storm's Wrath the board. But just every turn you play a land, you gain 4 life. I mean, that seems insane to me right off the rip. So, not to mention the middle ability is also very good. Just every ability on the card is good. 4 mana, 4/4, draw a card, and then when you play your next land, you gain 4 life. That's unbelievable. Like, that's so good. That is so worth 4 mana, dude. That is ridiculously worth 4 mana. And I'm not sure if the Omnath deck is going to be a thing or not, but some 4 or 5 color control deck is probably going to at least attempt to exist. And if it does, Omnath will probably be one of the things it's trying to do the most. Because just look at this. Look at this. People are undervalued. I haven't even really heard anybody talk about the first landfall ability. But, like, gain 4 life every time you play a land is... How do you beat that, right? I mean, you can. If you have enough damage, I'm sure you can beat it. But at the same time, like, that's hefty, dude. That is hefty. 4 life a turn, effectively. Plus, you have a big 4/4 to block with to drew your card. Dude, the card is nuts. Like, the card is banana bread. The card is bazookas. Like, this is a dumb Magic card. Like, in the good way, like you want. This is a good card. But anyway, final card. Have we finally made it to the last card of the day? Jeez. I've got the WAF, the wet-ass forehead. I've got it. But this card I've actually already talked about on stream, so that's why you should follow me on Twitch at SBMTGDev. You should do that, because I've already talked about this card there. But I'm going to talk about it again right now, and that's Nissa of Shadowed Bowels. 4 mana, a Golgari colors, and 2 colorless for 4 loyalty Planeswalker. But it's got more loyalty than that, because it's got Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you put a loyalty counter on Nissa. Hilarious. You can also +1 Nissa. To untap a land you control, you may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste and menace until end of turn. It's still a land. Thank you, Spaghetti Monster, for until end of turn. Jeez, thank you so much. But you can also -5 Nissa. Note that she starts on 4 loyalty. And remember, too, that you can, like, +1 her, so you basically get to her ultimate the turn after she comes into play, but you +1 her the turn she comes into play. And then the next turn, you drop a land, so she could feasibly have 6 loyalty and ultimate without dying. Just keep that in mind. But anyway, you -5 Nissa, and you may put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or the graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it for no reason. 2 +1/+1 counters for no reason. Makes even a 1/1 that you grab out of your yard at 3/3, which is pretty decent. But most of the time, you're going to be grabbing like a pretty big thing. It's restricted to the amount of lands you have, but obviously, you play this on turn 4. Turn 5, you'll probably have 5. So you can get like an Elder Gargaroth out of your yard on turn 5, which is gross. It checks notes, gross. I'm pretty sure it's gross. But even if you're just making like a land every turn that can swing, that doesn't seem bad. This card seems balanced, all things considered, to me, because, you know, it requires some sort of work to actually get a creature out of your yard, and even then you can't just get like a 12 drop out of your yard. You know? You have to get something that's, you know, the same amount of lands, but I mean, in Standard, we get so many lands so fast that you might be able to, like, get a Beanstalk Giant on turn 5, like, really easily from your yard with this. Or some similarly large creature, a 7-drop or something like that. It's feasible that you could in this environment. You know, turn 3 Euro into turn 4 Nissa, and then turn 5, you could seriously, you know, even just cultivate on that turn, but you might not even have to cultivate. And you could have, you know, at least 6 or 7 lands out on that turn. So that ability could be unbelievable on turn, you know, the turn after you play your Nissa. The problem is that she doesn't really protect herself super well, you know, like she makes a land until end of turn into a creature. So she makes attackers somewhat well, but she doesn't really make any way to protect herself. So the loyalty, the ultimate might be a little bit tougher to get to than we think. But that said, you know, landfall loyalty whenever you play a land seems dumb. Especially if you do, you know, play a land on the next turn, and then you cultivate, or you migration path, or just something, really anything. Euro is going to get her 2 loyalty counters. Migration path will get her 3 loyalty counters plus the one she gets for that turn when she +1s again. So I can see the loyalty actually getting out of hand like relatively quickly on this, and it just being an amazing piece for like rock decks, for mid-range decks, to have a card advantage tool or just some way to, you know, generate resilience in the late game. This looks great for that. But again, it does require some setup. It doesn't protect itself super well, and I could just see it getting gang tackled before it gets around to your next turn. So there are some built-in issues with this Nissa, but again, they're baked in on purpose. Otherwise, I think the card would be kind of broken. Again, I'm very glad that she creates lands until end of turn and not a land every turn like the last Nissa. That was a little bit much. I think we've all had enough of that. This looks far more balanced than the last Nissa we were subjected to. So I like this a good bit. I especially like the Golgari colors on it. That's pretty dope. I like the implications for mid-range decks in Standard. You know, we actually have a piece like this again. But that said, I think that mid-range decks in Standard would have much rather had a piece like this that can also affect the board in some way, you know, adversely for your opponent. Kill a creature or something like that. And this really doesn't do much of that. This just helps you attack a little bit better and also cheat creatures out of the yard. And I think that the first ability isn't as important as the second at all. And the first ability isn't actually that good when you think about it. So I'm not entirely sold on the power level of this Planeswalker, but the ultimate's going to make or break it. And I actually think the ultimate may end up being pretty easy to get to. If you just have 1 or 2 creatures out to protect this on blocks, then the next turn you could probably do something pretty righteous with it. So I think Nissa probably will go in decks. If not to cheat a big creature into play, then again, just to add to certain decks, you know, resilience in the late game. This gives you something that can generate creatures every turn. It can't generate extra creatures every turn like, you know, 5-mana Nissa from War of the Spark can, but this does play around sweepers. If your opponent has Shatter the Sky, then you're still, you know, getting 3 damage in every turn. So in that way, it's kind of like a riddle form almost, you know, like a thing that generates a 3/3 every turn but doesn't die to Shatter the Sky. I could see that being very important as well. So just keep all that stuff in mind. I think this Nissa probably will see Standard play, but it's nowhere near as overpowered as her most recent iteration outside of this. But that, I think, is it. I'm going to take a sip. Hydration, but I guarantee I just peaked the levels on this mic. Yeah, sorry about that, headphones users. But that's all I got for today. That was a whole bunch of cards. I'm sorry, that probably took like 5 hours. That was a ton of cards. But I hope that you hung out for the entire thing. We had a lot to talk about today. I think that Zendikar Rising might be one of the most important Magic expansions of all time. And I've got a video coming out on why I believe that. But suffice to say, and to say it succinctly, I think that Wizards really needs to knock this one out of the park. And I think that we gotten off to a good start today with some of these cards. I don't think everything was Standard playable, but I do think Limited looks like a pretty dynamic environment with some interesting goals to shoot for. And the cards that do look Standard playable look like they're going to affect the face of Standard massively. So the set is doing some of the things I wanted it to do already, but I have a lot more to say on the subject. YouTube video on that soon. But now it's your turn. Just let me know how you felt about all these. What interactions did I miss? What did I not talk about? Is there some kind of combo with that 4-mana Cleric legend already that I've somehow missed that makes it the best card in Standard? So things have happened before. So just let me know what I missed, because I'm sure there's a few things. And get at me in the comments section. You can also follow me on Twitch at SBMTGDev, or donate to the channel and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. $1 a month lets you vote on content, and as soon as this sets out, we'll be doing deck techs. You want to vote on that, it's just $1 a month. And you'll also get notifications when I start streaming on Twitch if you're a $1 a month patron, which is good because Twitch doesn't always tell you when I start streaming, but Patreon will when I send that notification out. So do that if you feel like it. Links in the description, all that stuff. But I just hope you guys enjoyed it. The set's already looking pretty hyped to me. I like a lot of what they're trying to do with it, and I like the idea that it's going to play into some of the other things they're doing later in the year. You know, this party thing is going to play well into the Dungeons & Dragons core set later on this year. And I guess the last bit of news, by the way, that I want to point out before I get off is that Kaldheim is actually coming out finally after 3 years of talking about Kaldheim. They're doing Kaldheim. And then the next set after that is going to be some sort of Harry Potter thing. I forgot what it's called, but it's about like a wizarding magic school. It's Harry Potter. They're doing Harry Potter. And I'm actually kind of shameful to say I'm really excited for that set. I kind of really am. So, but yeah, just let me know how you felt about all the cards and all the news and stuff today. And I will catch you cats later. I am Dev from the place. I'm going to go somewhere and cool down. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.